There are houses in the world built in places almost no one can reach. Some stand in the middle of raging seas. Some cling to towering cliffs. Some sit among snowy mountains, deserted islands, and lands cut off from the rest of the world. In these places, just one storm, one giant wave, or one wrong step can turn daily life into a fight for survival. These are the world's most inaccessible houses, where isolation, courage, and the instinct to survive push beyond every limit of logic. La Jument Lighthouse, France. It is hard to believe that a lighthouse can stand in a place where an entire tower can be swallowed by the sea in just a few seconds. La Jument does not stand on a safe island, but is fixed directly onto a lonely underwater rock in the rough waters of France. When major storms arrive, towering walls of white water can completely hide the structure, making the lighthouse seem to disappear into the ocean. In 1989, a famous photograph captured the moment the keeper stepped outside because he thought the sound of a helicopter meant rescue, while a giant wave was rushing toward him from behind. He was lucky to move back inside in time, and former keepers said storms made the floors shake. Furniture crashed down, and waves explode against the tower, like being trapped inside a giant metal barrel. La Jument was built after a shipwreck disaster that killed more than 250 people. So its light does not only guide ships, but also serves as a reminder of the price the sea once claimed. Elodie Island, Iceland. Inside, it is only a small white house, but outside it is a whole world cut away from every familiar comfort by the ocean. The island did not actually break away from the mainland, but is the remaining part of an ancient volcanic mass that rose from the seafloor 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. The famous house was not built for luxury vacations, but was constructed in 1953 as a temporary shelter for a puffin hunting association. With no grid electricity, internet or underground water, life inside is pulled back to the simplest level, depending only on rainwater collected from the roof. Around the house, the island's surface curves like half of an upside-down bowl, then drops into the sea through black basalt cliffs almost 90 degrees steep. With no harbour, no roads and no booking service, this place shows that some doors cannot be opened with money alone. Bivacco Buffa di Pereiro, Italy. This house is like an old soldier still clinging to the mountainside, silently enduring avalanches, alpine storms, and more than a century of time. After decades of abandonment and roof collapse caused by harsh mountain weather, it was restored by Italy's 6th Alpini Regiment in 2022 as an emergency shelter. With no traditional foundation, the structure sits inside a natural alcove formed from ancient limestone and dolomite that once developed beneath an old ocean floor. At about 9,055 feet above sea level, it reveals only a small front wall in mid-air, while the other three sides are locked inside sheer rock faces. What makes it even more remarkable is that the brick and stone structure has not slipped from the cliff in more than 100 years. A striking example of the stability of the rock alcove holding it in place. Today, the real challenge is not staying inside the shelter, but reaching it, as climbers must cross a suspension bridge about 89 feet long above a deep abyss, made even more famous after appearing in the film Cliffhanger.
Monsell Sea Forts, United Kingdom. Offshore, in the cold grey spray, the whole group of forts rises like a herd of dead iron monsters standing still on thin legs in the sea. They were built during World War II for air defense, using hollow concrete bases that were pulled out to sea and then flooded so they sank into the soft seabed at about 30 degrees. Each group had 7 separate towers, each weighing about 300 tons, once linked by hanging steel bridges, so if one tower fell, the others could keep fighting. Daily tides rising and falling by about 16 to 20 feet created powerful currents that kept cutting around the legs, while winter fog made the metal rust faster. After the military abandoned them, these ghost towers were once taken over by pirate radio stations, turning the isolated scrap field into a rebel base beyond mainland law. Today, broken windows, rotting bridges, and metal groans in the wind make this place feel like a dead village staring into the dark sea.
Bivouac Gervasity, Italy. Through the bulging glass at the end of the shelter, the abyss appears like a dark, empty space swallowing the Alps. Because it stands at about 9,301 feet high, where oxygen levels are only around 70%, climbers can lose breath before their bodies adapt. With no natural protection, the shelter must face blizzard winds above 124 miles per hour and harsh UV rays from the thin atmosphere. To survive in that position, it was made from fiberglass and composite alloy. 33 feet long, but weighing only about 4,365 pounds, so a helicopter could lift it onto the mountain. Its tube shape helps split the wind and push snow off the surface, while the small interior still holds 12 bunk beds in about 323 square feet. From the spot where it replaced an old metal and wood hut from 1948, this place is not just a rest stop, but a survival room hanging among broken rock, cold ice, and open emptiness. Capanna Margherita, Italy. Some houses are so extreme that simply reaching the door already becomes a survival test between permanent ice and thin air. Its history began in 1893, when Queen Margherita crossed glaciers herself to open a building that meant far more than a normal mountain refuge. When the modern version was rebuilt in 1980, each section had to be lifted by 74 helicopter flights because there was no normal transport route. Part of the structure extends over a deep cliff, making this metal house look as if it is floating between clouds, rock, and empty space. The copper alloy shell turns the entire house into a Faraday cage, guiding lightning around the outside instead of letting it pass inside. This house does not only save people in snow and ice, but also becomes a living laboratory where doctors study the limits of the human body. Sphinx Observatory, Switzerland. A place that seems reserved only for scientists actually gives ordinary people a chance to reach the frozen world high above the clouds. From a distance, the structure looks like an artificial rock growing out of a mountain ridge surrounded by snow so completely that almost no sign of the world below remain. Instead of climbing across dangerous ice and snow, visitors arrive through a mountain railway and are lifted to the observation deck in just 25 seconds. Opened in 1937, this place is not only an engineering achievement but also an example of how humans turned an isolated summit into a station for studying the atmosphere and the universe. Inside, many areas remain closed to visitors because they are laboratories dedicated to meteorology, cosmic rays, and measurements that require extreme isolation. The astronomical dome can close against winds of about 124 miles per hour, protecting the telescopes while snowfields and deep voids surround the entire structure. Refuge des Cosmiques, France. On the edge of white ice, this metal house looks so small that it feels like a shelter hanging between the high sky and a freezing abyss. Around it are giant ice towers and glacier cracks dozens of feet deep, where one missing step can make a person vanish under the snow. The building is locked into the rock by deep steel anchors, while its metal shell helps it resist violent winds sweeping across the mountain slopes. At about 11,854 feet high, the oxygen level is around 35% lower, forcing the lungs and heart to work harder, even when the body is standing still. Its name comes from the 1930s, when it was once an isolated laboratory used to study cosmic rays passing through the atmosphere. Strangely, between ice, thin air, and danger, this place still has hot meals, sleeping rooms, and research equipment, like a lonely house surviving on the edge of the world. Panagia Hosoviatisa Monastery, Greece. From far away, this monastery looks like a thin white mark clinging to a giant rock wall, as if one strong wind could erase it from the cliff. To reach that doorway, visitors must climb about 300 steep stone steps beside the drop, where every breath reminds them that the sea is far below. Inside is an unusually narrow 8-storey building, about 131 feet long, but in some parts only 16 feet wide, making it seem almost swallowed by the cliff. At about 984 feet high, the structure is anchored directly into a near vertical rock face, with no garden, terrace or base supporting it below. In summer, the bare rock surface can heat up to between 104 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit, then cool quickly after sunset, forcing the structure to face daily thermal stress. After more than 900 years, this place is still protected by a few monks, like a lonely house of faith hanging between burning sun, wind, and a straight fall into the sea. San Juan de Gaztelugaixi, Spain. A winding stone stairway bends across the island's slope like an ancient stitch, leading to a tiny chapel hanging between sky and sea. More than 240 rough steps once exhausted attackers in heavy armour, because every climb broke their formation before they reached the top. Salt mist from the ocean is blown high like a thin layer of acid, slowly eating the stone mortar and making metal decay quickly. Dating back to the 10th century, The structure stands on a cone-shaped rocky island and is connected to the mainland by only one winding stone bridge. On days of thick coastal fog, the sea below disappears from sight, making the island and chapel seem to float in mid-air. Even after fire, storms, and lightning tried to erase it many times, the structure still appears on the rocky summit as if this place never accepted being forgotten. Laojun Mountain, China. When white clouds rise along the mountain back, the gilded temple roofs appear like ancient lamps burning high in the sky. About 2,500 years ago, this place became linked with Taoist tradition and turned into a sacred mountain of cultivation, retreat, and alchemy legends. In winter, temperatures can fall to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing water vapour on branches and cliffs like a cold coat of armour. This granite mountain carries traces of geological change lasting about 1.9 billion years, so each cliff feels like a very old page of Earth history. At sunrise or sunset, the gilded roof tiles catch the light and reflect it through the clouds, forming a halo-like glow around the summit. At 7,274 feet high, among thin air and more than 200 foggy days each year, the most impressive part is still that humans once built these structures on dangerous rocky peaks. International Space Station. Like an artificial star racing across the night sky, the International Space Station is the farthest continuously inhabited outpost, orbiting about 249 miles above Earth. Weighing around 463 US tons and costing about $150 billion, it is one of the largest and most expensive international engineering projects ever built. Inside is a cramped maze of cables, screens, and scientific equipment where humans have lived continuously since November 2000, while carrying out thousands of experiments. In microgravity, astronauts must exercise for about 2 hours every day, or their bones can lose up to 2% of their mass each month as the body begins to absorb its own calcium. Beyond the thin aluminum shell are vacuum, radiation, and millions of debris fragments travelling at about 17,398 miles per hour. Fast enough to turn even a small object into a deadly threat. Even after returning from a spacewalk, astronauts often notice that their suits carry a strange smell similar to gunpowder and burnt meat, a lingering trace of the harsh environment beyond Earth. Masada Fortress, Israel. If you were left alone on top of Masada, this place would feel like a giant trap because all around it are desert, deep cliffs, and almost no easy way out. The reason is that this rock rises about 1,480 feet above the water below and is surrounded by steep walls like natural barriers. Even today, people who want to reach the top must climb a narrow dirt path about 1 mile long, twisting under harsh sun and sometimes taking nearly 2 hours. With no river or natural water source on the summit, ancient builders had to carve 12 large reservoirs into the rock to capture rare floods and keep people alive. During the siege of 72 to 73 AD, Roman forces also could not climb straight up, so they had to build a huge ramp to bring soldiers to the fortress. Nearly 2,000 years later, this lonely refuge still hangs above a world of rock and cliffs, making it hard to believe that hundreds of people once lived here. Key Monastery, India. On dry stone and snow, the monastery appears like a layered white mass fighting against the thin Himalayan sky. Narrow corridors, tiny windows, and thick walls turn the inside into a defensive maze where any attacking group could once be slowed down out. Nearly 1,000 years of turmoil brought fires, raids, and earthquakes to this place many times, yet monks kept building over the old ruins. At about 13,668 feet high, the oxygen level is only around 60% of the lowland level, making every step a physical challenge. On stormy days, the zigzag corridors inside work like windpipes, creating ghostly whistles that echo against the stone walls. Even when winter can fall below minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit and daytime UV rays can still burn the skin, about 300 monks continue to live and study inside this lonely house. Fastnet Rock Lighthouse, Ireland. Among rolling sea foam, this stone tower appears like humanity's last marker before the deep offshore water. The current structure was built from 2,074 granite blocks, weighing about 2 to 3 US tons each, with a curved base designed to redirect the force of giant waves. The cast iron tower from 1854 once shook so violently in storms that it could no longer be used, so the stone tower completed in 1904 replaced it. It stands about 8 miles from the coast on a rock only 98 feet high at low tide, where almost no extra space exists for a foundation. During extreme storms, waves can reach about 131 feet and swallow the rock below, making the lighthouse seem to rise from white foam. Even when winds once passed 99 miles per hour, and salt water kept washing away every sign of life, its flash every 5 seconds remains the only heartbeat in the dark ocean. Monte Rosa Hut, Switzerland. Like a crystal dropped into an ancient world of ice, this 6.5 million Swiss franc structure stands at about 9,458 feet in the cold Alps. When sunlight touches its angled glass surfaces, the entire polygonal building glows with a rose gold colour, like a strange lighthouse rising from a grey, frozen landscape. Beneath it lies a permanent ocean of ice that keeps cracking and shifting, while UV rays and sunlight reflected from snow can cause snow blindness very quickly. Because no road reaches this harsh mountain environment, more than 3,000 helicopter flights were needed to carry every building material up to nearly 10,000 feet for construction. The result is a reflective aluminum and glass shell that can produce about 90% of its own energy through 1,292 square feet of solar panels. Unlike the sharp, cold exterior, the warm wooden core inside has enough space for 120 climbers overnight, turning this place into a survival home in a sea of ice. Refugio Nuvolao stands alone at 8,448 feet, like a lasting historical witness above the giant limestone mountains of northern Italy. At sunset, minerals inside the rock catch the final light, turning the entire horizon red and orange like a burning sea of fire. Few visitors realise that the stone below was once a coral reef, formed about 250 million years ago, before tectonic forces lifted it from the ancient seabed into the clouds. Directly behind the building, a vertical cliff drops more than 1,000 feet, making the shelter look like a bird's nest holding onto the final piece of rock. Its walls were built from local stone, allowing the structure to blend so completely into the mountain that it almost disappears. No cable car reaches the door, so every traveller must cross rough gravel trails before resting inside a cabin built on a prehistoric coral reef. Needles Lighthouse, England. Among white rock pillars that are slowly being consumed by the ocean, Needles Lighthouse still stands like the last guardian of one of the most challenging sea routes around England. The current structure was built in 1859 to replace an older lighthouse on the high cliffs where thick fog often hid its warning signal from passing ships. Its light can reach about 17 nautical miles, giving vessels enough distance to recognise the danger before entering the hazardous waters filled with submerged rocks. It stands on the final rocky point of a chain of white chalk stacks, where millions of years of waves have broken a continuous ridge into isolated stone pillars rising from the sea. To make construction possible, engineers used explosives to cut deep into the chalk rock and even created storage chambers inside so lighthouse keepers could survive when rough seas prevented supplies from arriving. Today, the light is operated entirely by machines, yet looking at the small tower surrounded by sea and cliffs, it is still hard to believe that people once spent months living here, almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. Melagavi looks like a stone house locked into the cliff, because the stones used to build it were cut from this area instead of being brought from somewhere else. Before 1982, every night here still needed lighthouse keepers to feed the fuel, clean the soot, and protect the light in a place almost cut off from people. During World War II, the light was completely shut off from 1940 to 1945, turning the sea in front of it into a dangerous dark zone for ships. Melagavi does not have the smooth, round shape of many other lighthouses, but a T-shaped body with a square tower, so each stone block had to face sea wind in a harsher way. Since 1897, the structure has remained on barren limestone, where salty wind almost prevents wooden trees from surviving. When night falls and no town lights cover the sky, this lonely house has only its flash every 10 seconds beneath the cold Milky Way. Capocaccia Lighthouse, Italy. Some lonely houses are surrounded by forests or mountains, but this lighthouse was pushed to the very edge of the ocean, standing between solid ground and the abyss. For more than 160 years, its light has continued sweeping across the darkness, guiding ships through waters known for strong winds and heavy fog. Northwest winds exceeding 62 miles per hour often slam directly into the cliff, making this one of the harshest places a lighthouse keeper could call home. Beneath the structure lies ancient limestone formed about 100 to 140 million years ago, far older than any human history around it. Because it stands on the top of a sheer cliff, the light operates at a height of 610 feet, even though the tower itself is only 79 feet tall. In a place of vertical rock and ocean striking the cliff base, more than 650 steps carved into the mountain turn every human journey into a battle with height and exhaustion. The name Terrible Tilly does not only describe the violent waves, but also the feeling of being trapped at sea on a rock with no way out. From 1881 to 1957, roaring storms, shaking floors, and months of isolation caused many lighthouse keepers to suffer serious mental breakdowns. Tillamook stands about 1 mile from land with no beach or trees, so every supply trip had to face deep water and powerful currents. That isolation pushed construction far beyond the original budget, making it the most expensive lighthouse built along this coast at the time. On the rock, a slippery layer mixed with animal waste made every step dangerous, while the heavy smell made life even harder. Even when the sea looks blue and calm, hidden currents below can turn the beauty around this lonely house into a deadly trap. Rising like a granite spear through the French sky, Aiguille du Midi forces humans to face the abyss without any natural protection. Two, its most famous experience is a transparent glass box extending beyond the cliff, making visitors feel suspended above a void more than 3,281 feet deep. Three, at this completely exposed position, wind gusts can reach 137 miles per hour, strong enough to knock a person off balance near the edge. Four, the surrounding landscape contains only permanent snow, bare rock, and deep blue crevasses that can hide dangerous empty spaces beneath the ice. Fito, at 12,605 feet, air pressure falls to about 60% of sea level pressure, causing shortness of breath and a rapid heartbeat. Six. The cable car carries the body from low ground into temperatures below 32 degrees Fahrenheit in about 20 minutes, creating a sudden change that many visitors cannot quickly adapt to. Each time the tide covers the reef, Ram Island Ledge Light looks like a granite house, weighing thousands of tons, somehow floating on a violent sea. After it was automated in 1958, its thick oak door closed, ending the era when lighthouse keepers lived in isolation and depended on supply boats that storms could block for weeks. To survive without people staying inside, the tower rises about 72 feet and is built from granite blocks weighing up to 4 tons, locked together with dovetail joints. Beneath the structure lies a reef that appears only at low tide, then becomes a hidden blade under about 10 to 13 feet of water as the tide returns. One side of the reef slopes like a ramp, forcing deep wave energy upward and turning the tower into the main target of rising walls of water. So, with the sea rising by about 1 inch every 7 years, the lowest entrances of this lonely house will become increasingly difficult to reach. Baluzek does not look like a lighthouse made for sightseeing, but like a sea watch point set on a cold basalt edge, where daily life is almost cut off from the mainland. Its name is linked to a naval artillery lieutenant from the 1857 survey. So from its origin, this place already carried a clear military identity. The tower was built from local granite in the 1930s, forming a heavy and solid structure meant to survive for a long time against snowstorms and strong winds. Behind its romantic outside is a military maritime post where the lighthouse keeper must live under strict discipline like a border guard. Each day here is not only about keeping the light on for ships, but also about living with the sound of wind, cold air, and distance from normal life. That is why Baluzek is dangerous, not only because of cliffs and deep water, but because it turns a human home into an isolated watch position in the middle of the ocean. Seen from above, the rocks offshore resemble the spine of a giant creature sinking into the sea, while a white tower stands alone on the last piece of land. Every 12 seconds, Nugget Point sends out a flash from 279 feet above the water, reaching about 25 miles across a dark sea filled with hidden rocks. The path to the lighthouse is only a narrow line along the hillside, with a vertical rock wall on one side and a 249-foot drop on the other. With no land blocking the open ocean, winds above 62 miles per hour can knock a person off balance while crossing the exposed path. Below the cliff, sharp reefs and powerful currents turn the water around Nugget Point into a trap that once tore open many ships. To build this lonely house in 1869, workers quarried stone by hand and moved each block beside the cliff edge without modern machinery. The road to Cape Formentor clings to the mountainside through sharp U-shaped turns, looking like a thin ribbon stretched above the sea. At sunset, red light covers the limestone cliff, making the white tower stand out in scenery so beautiful that people can forget the deep drop beside them. Many barriers rise below an adult's waist, creating a sense of safety but offering almost no protection if a powerful gust causes someone to slip. Four winds meet here and can produce gusts above 75 miles per hour, turning even the short viewing path into a dangerous crossing. Before the lighthouse was completed in 1863, workers spent 6 years blasting a road and hanging from the cliff to move materials to the site. Between grey rock and dark blue water, the lonely lighthouse still stands beside a 689-foot drop, where one small mistake may leave no chance to recover. Seen from above, Spitbank Fort forms a closed grey circle in the sea, surrounding only a small courtyard like a prison with no shore to escape to. The structure took 11 years to build, from 1867 to 1878, but new rifled weapons made its defences almost outdated as soon as it was completed. Most strangely, the rooftop that once held cannons now contains a hot pool and a fire pit, turning an old stage of war into a place of luxury. Yet the entire fort still rests on a submerged sandbank, while powerful tides sweep around its foundation and could carry anyone who falls beyond the railing away. Side, low brick corridors, curved ceilings, and rusted hooks still preserve the heavy feeling of a place once filled with soldiers and explosives. Though 9 bedrooms have replaced the ammunition rooms, the deep sea and closed designs still make Spitbank feel like a lonely house with no natural escape. Despite being called the southernmost point, Lindesens stands on rocks more than 1 billion years old, where glaciers once stripped the surface bare before winter storms continued to wear it down. The white cast iron tower rises 52 feet and was built in 1915 from bolted plates, allowing it to move slightly and spread the force instead of being broken by storm winds. Directly below the cliff, 2 ocean currents collide, keeping the sea covered in foam and leaving it almost no moment of calm. Temperature differences offshore also create thick fog that can erase visibility and hide the reefs directly ahead of a ship. Old bunkers and dark tunnel entrances from World War II still remain in the ancient rock, leaving the marks of war around this lonely lighthouse home. Among black rocks and rough seas, the last lighthouse keepers remain, guarding the light by human hands in an age of machines. This is not a place where the coast ends quietly, because Kermor Van stands on the first headland struck by storms where sea spray can rise more than 98 feet. – . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . The keepers once depended on a single stone bridge, and when seawater covered the passage, they could remain trapped for days as cold winds continued and food supplies fell. At the end of the bridge stands a rare square tower 66 feet high, forcing its base to be built from massive stones so the corners could survive direct wind pressure. Those waves, currents, and hidden reefs caused many shipwrecks over nearly 2 centuries, while the light could only warn sailors and could not save those already pulled too close to the rocks. The tower remains locked while an automatic system continues sending red warning light from a lonely house that no longer has the people who once kept its flame alive. Each time the tide hides the reef below, Fada 4 appears like a lonely tower floating above restless water with no safe way to reach it. This isolation once placed the station in the hell category, where lighthouse keepers lived like prisoners among crashing waves, cold stone walls, and days when leaving was impossible. The harsh conditions were already clear during construction from 1869 to 1874, because workers could build for only a few hours at low tide and sometimes waited months to place another granite block. In thick fog, the entire tower disappears from view, leaving only the deep sound of its foghorn in the darkness. Every 15 seconds, the lighthouse sends out a flash that can reach about 28 miles, helping ships avoid reefs hidden by the fog. After automation in 1993, the tower door remained locked while machines continued to maintain the light inside a house in the sea where no one lives anymore. When fog moves across the coast, Pigeon Point nearly loses its entire shape, leaving only a tall, dark tower rising above grey rocks and shadowy water. These dangerous waters destroyed the carrier pigeon in 1853, and that disaster later gave the lighthouse its name. To prevent another tragedy, keepers once carried fuel up 144 steps every day to maintain a Fresnel lens weighing more than 2,200 pounds and containing 1,008 hand-polished prisms. However, the danger does not exist only at sea because the tower stands near fault zones that could widen cracks already hidden deep inside the brick structure. Directly below is a cliff about 49 feet high with almost no sandy shore, so anyone who falls may be repeatedly driven against the rock face by waves. The keeper's house no longer holds a human light, leaving the tower standing alone above a coastline where many sailors once failed to return. In a place where the cold can freeze breath in midair, people still live in Oymyakon through winters averaging minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, with temperatures once falling to nearly minus 96. Directly beneath the village, permafrost dozens of feet deep forces every home to stand on piles so indoor heat does not melt the frozen ground. At the surface, roads are often buried under snow and ice, making it extremely difficult for food, fuel, and outside help to reach the village. Travel also depends on engines staying active, because once a vehicle is switched off, the motor oil can freeze and prevent it from starting again. The cold even controls burials, forcing residents to burn fires for days to soften the ground before a grave can be dug. Even so, children still go to school in temperatures near minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, treating an impossible condition elsewhere as a normal winter day. The wooden bridge of Liechtenstein Castle could once be raised completely, turning the only entrance into an empty gap and allowing its owner to isolate himself from the outside world. Just beyond the bridge, the watchtowers and narrow openings look prepared for war, but they were mainly designed here for viewing because the walls were not thick enough to survive cannon fire. The real danger lies in the foundation, where thousands of tons of stone place uneven pressure on a narrow rock beside a drop of more than 820 feet. The walls also follow the cliff edge closely, forcing the natural rock below to carry the full weight of the castle. The present foundation also rests above the ruins of two earlier fortresses destroyed in 1311 and 1381, meaning the fairy tale structure was built over several layers of destruction. In winter, snow and ice remove every warm colour, leaving only a cold grey structure standing alone above the bare forest. In the morning fog, the base of Mont Saint-Michel disappears completely, leaving only the structure floating among the clouds and the golden statue at its summit, about 512 feet high. Beneath this peaceful appearance, the mudflat hides quicksand that can trap a walker just before the returning tide cuts off every escape route. On this rock, surrounded by tidal mud and shifting water, people spent more than 500 years pulling granite blocks weighing several tons up the steep slope without modern machinery. In the 19th century, a raised causeway blocked the water flow, causing sand to build up until the island nearly became part of the mainland. It took 10 years and more than 200 million euros to replace the road with a bridge, restore the tidal flow and keep the mountain separated from the mainland. Although around 3 million tourists visit each year, only 30 to 40 people live here permanently. So after the crowds leave, the entire fortress stands alone in the sea once again. The only way to reach the chapel is a narrow stairway wrapped around an almost vertical stone pillar, keeping climbers only a few steps from the cliff edge. On the cramped summit, medieval builders also created supporting arches that extended over the open air to provide more floor space. The chapel was begun in 962 on top of a 279-foot stone pillar and has remained standing for more than 1,060 years. So In 1955, restoration of the main altar unexpectedly revealed a hidden chamber containing 11th century crosses that had been forgotten for nearly 1,000 years. The chapel not only concealed sacred objects, but its interior was also once covered with bright frescoes, and many images of angels still remain on the curved ceiling. One step backward near the wooden door could lead directly into the abyss, while the chapel still stands alone at the top of the stone pillar. At an altitude of 11,286 feet, Namche Bazaar is the final resting point, where thin air quickly drains strength from every breath. Towering walls of ice and rocks surround the town, while winter temperatures fall low enough to freeze many water sources. With no roads for motor vehicles, food, fuel and building materials must be carried upward by porters or pack animals. A small helipad plays a life-saving role, helping evacuate climbers suffering from severe altitude sickness or pulmonary edema. Across the steep slope, blue and red metal roofs rise in layers, creating a horseshoe-shaped settlement that follows the curve of the mountain. Farther above, trees gradually disappear and give way to loose rocks and cold moss, making Namche the final boundary before the barren high mountains. The village lies inside a fault where one limestone mass was split in two, while its orange rooftops form a narrow curve between the cliffs. To climb from the centre of Moustier Sainte-Marie to the sacred site above, earlier residents carved 262 stone steps along the steep slope beside the abyss, where one slip could make a climber lose balance. Just below this path, cold water from a karst cave system flows through the settlement, filling daily life between the houses with the sound of a waterfall and a fast current. This enclosed landscape, the constant sound of water, and the natural caves attracted monks as early as the 5th century, when they chose to live apart from the outside world. Centuries later, a royal order to melt down gold and silver tableware made the villagers' white glazed pottery a luxury product turning a poor place of isolation into a wealthy craft centre. When darkness fills the rocky gap, the chain disappears, leaving only the golden star shining between the cliffs above the silent rooftops. As the position of the sun changes, hundreds of stone pillars divide the light into enormous shadows, making the plain below appear different from hour to hour. The cliffs rise at angles close to 90 degrees, so an object falling from a monastery edge could drop freely for hundreds of feet before reaching the ground. Large horizontal cracks still mark the rock surfaces, preserving signs of ancient floods and the erosion caused by wind and ice across many geological periods. This long erosion created natural cavities in the cliffs, where the first hermit monks lived beside the abyss before permanent monasteries were built. This life, almost completely separated from the ground, also explains why the name Meteora means suspended in the air. Although the Meteora monastery complex attracts millions of visitors, only around 60 monks and nuns live year-round on these summits, high above the plain. Hidden beneath peaceful green meadows, Schäffler Hut, also known as Berggasthaus Schäffler, is a mountain restaurant and refuge in Switzerland standing at 6,299 feet. The building clings to a narrow, winding ridge that looks like the sharp backbone of a giant dragon. One side descends through gentle grassland, while the opposite side suddenly breaks into an almost vertical cliff. Morning dew can make the grassy trail dangerously slippery, allowing one wrong step to carry a hiker toward the edge. Beneath the thin soil, limestone layers were compressed and folded by tectonic movement millions of years ago. When winter snowstorms arrive, Schäffler Hut closes for several months and remains alone on the exposed, windswept ridge. Baoshan looks like a village locked onto a rock, where more than 100 families live on top of a mushroom-shaped stone formation and turn the original rock into beds, stoves and stairways. At an elevation of about 5,643 feet, the settlement is blocked by sheer cliffs on three sides, while the remaining side drops toward a fast-flowing river. Moving closer, layers of grey tiled roofs follow the steep slope, making the houses appear to grow directly out of the rock face. In sharp contrast to the cold grey stone, green terraced fields curve gently into the valley, creating a powerful divide between danger and peace. Inside this enclosed world, about 70% of the structures use natural stone, providing rare protection against fire, while generations have continued living here for centuries. With no roads for vehicles, rice, bricks and even refrigerators must be carried by residents or pack animals up hundreds of steep stone steps. Standing quietly at nearly 11,500 feet, Chitkul feels like the final point of every motor road before the uninhabited wilderness begins. Just beyond the edge of the village, the green signs of life quickly disappear, revealing a barren valley covered with stones, grey sand, and ice. In sharp contrast, the inner valley remains full of colour, with a turquoise glacial river, dark pine forests, and snow-covered mountain peaks. Pressed against the foot of the mountains, grey slate roofs overlap like dragon scales, giving the village a distinct look while allowing heavy snow to slide away. During winter, more than 3 feet of snow blocks every entrance, forcing residents into isolation and leaving them dependent on stored food and dried meat. Reaching Chitkul requires crossing a narrow one-lane dirt road, clinging to the mountainside above drops of several hundred feet, with almost no protective barriers. Unlike the familiar snow-covered peaks, the Forbidden Kingdom of Lo Monthang stands nearly 12,500 feet high, but appears as a dry mountain desert. Across this nearly treeless red land, emerald barley fields surround flat rooftops piled with firewood which locals believe can keep evil spirits away. Enclosing this unusual settlement is an earthen wall about 26 feet high and 2,400 feet long, which has protected the community for more than 6 centuries. Its separation from the outside world until 1992 helped preserve its ancient Tibetan language, beliefs, and culture. During winter, freezing temperatures and food shortages force more than half the population to lock their homes and lead their livestock in lower valleys. Reaching Lo Montagne requires several exhausting days in a four-wheel drive vehicle along narrow roads, beside steep cliffs, followed by crossings through rushing rivers with no bridges. Pilgrimage Church of Maria Gern, Germany. From a distance, this church looks like a fragile human trace left behind in a landscape too large to control. The main structure was completed in only 2 years, from 1708 to 1710, in hard-to-reach mountain terrain and long before modern machines existed. What is hard to believe is that this large scale first served only to protect a wooden statue of the Virgin Mary less than 3 feet tall, which local people deeply trusted. The valley around it was not gentle from the beginning, but a mark left after Ice Age glaciers scraped the land more than 10,000 years ago. Because the mountain behind rises over 8,858 feet, the church becomes a small point to the human eye, as if the whole building is being swallowed by the landscape. Between mountain shadow, thick snow, and the feeling of being swallowed, this place becomes a lonely shelter that is hard to believe could stand for centuries. Squeezed into a mountain ravine with almost no flat ground, Quandixia turns the rooftops of lower homes into courtyards for those above, creating a miniature potala more than 400 years old. Behind this layered structure, the entire settlement lies between steep cliffs at an elevation of about 1,300 feet, nearly separated from the outside world. Running through this enclosed space are rough stone alleys that grow narrow, steep, and twisting between high walls like cracks carved deep into the mountain. To adapt to the harsh terrain, residents fitted large, rough stones tightly together, helping the ancient walls remain standing across many generations. Beyond their strength, the narrower corners and high lookout points also allowed residents to watch strangers and turn the village into a natural defensive system. Yet after a period of economic decline, residents gradually left, abandoning black-tiled roofs and cold grey walls like a ghost town trapped inside the canyon. Shanhumiao village transforms an entire valley into a vast sea of stilt houses where thousands of wooden rooftops belonging to more than 1,000 households cover both steep mountainsides. Deep inside this enclosed V-shaped landscape, the settlement is surrounded by mountain slopes, forcing every path to follow the rugged terrain. The damp ground and surrounding forests forced residents to raise their living spaces on wooden stilts to escape water, insects, and wild animals below. Even more remarkably, many homes are secured with interlocking wooden joints and almost no iron nails, yet they have remained firmly attached to the mountainsides for centuries. At dawn, thick fog swallows the valley, making the upper layers of rooftops appear to float in mid-air. Yet beneath this unreal scene, narrow stone paths, steep slopes, and tens of thousands of steps still turn daily movement into a demanding physical challenge. Torn into countless small pieces of land by the ocean, the fishing village of Veiholmen survives on such a fragile boundary that the land and sea almost seem to merge into one. To enter this isolated world, visitors must follow a single road connecting rocky islets, narrow bridges and causeways running close to the water. Beyond this route, Rows of red, yellow, and white houses stand out against salty winds and grey clouds, helping fishermen recognise the village during harsh weather. Yet these bright colours cannot hide the weakness of land rising only about 52 feet at its highest point, where large waves and ocean storms constantly threaten the settlement. Amid this constant danger, wooden racks covered with cod show that this remains a real community built around life at sea. Beneath a wall of granite that seems to tear through the Arctic Ocean, Lofoten still holds tiny fishing villages between vertical cliffs and the freezing sea. To enter this precarious world, visitors must cross high concrete arch bridges constantly exposed to powerful sea winds and snowstorms. After this dangerous journey, wooden fishing cabins appear beneath the mountains, resting against the rocks and extending over stilts because there is almost no flat land. The isolation becomes even clearer when you learn that until the end of the last century, life here still depended heavily on boats crossing rough seas to maintain contact with the mainland. Yet a warm ocean current softens this Arctic region, keeping winter temperatures along the coast from falling far below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. This same cold, dry and windy air has allowed residents to naturally dry cod outdoors without salt for more than 1,000 years. Without seeing the open sky, the residents of Jongdong still live year-round inside a massive cave where stalactites form a natural roof over the entire village. The stone chamber is about 328 feet wide and more than 656 feet long, large enough to hold homes hidden deep inside the mountain. Reaching this isolated place requires more than 1 hour of climbing across sharp cast slopes because no road for motor vehicles leads to the village. Protected from rain and sunlight by the cave ceiling, wooden and bamboo homes rise in layers across the sloping ground, while residents collect water from streams seeping through the rock walls. Beyond these difficult conditions, every sound echoes through the cavern, leaving families with almost no private space. Bishop Rock, England. Some structures are not built on land but seem to be placed directly into the mouth of the waves, proving how far humans were willing to challenge the ocean. At the lowest tide, the natural rock rises only about 13 feet above the water, but during major storms, waves can bury the entire island beneath massive walls of white foam. The rock is only about 151 feet long and 52 feet wide, and Guinness recognised it as the smallest island in the world with a man-made structure on it. The surface is so narrow that the lighthouse foundation almost occupies every available space, making the tower appear to grow directly from the sea. To survive the force of the ocean, the current lighthouse was built from 5,700 tons of granite, with blocks locked together like a fortress of light standing against the waves. Three-Drungar VT Lighthouse, Iceland. In the cold grey sea, this lighthouse house appears like a lonely red and white dot pinned to the top of a vertical rock pillar. In 1939, before helicopters were used for support, builders had to form a human tower on a rocking boat just to reach the first ledge. The structure stands about 4 miles from the mainland, isolated in the ocean, with no beach, road or safe rock shelf for retreat. It rises on a basalt sea stack about 118 feet high, the remains of an ancient volcano shaped by waves for thousands of years. Even more frightening, this place has no escape stairs or water pipes. So when bad weather blocks the helicopter, it no longer feels like a structure, but like a house locked between black rock, white waves, and the cold sky. Directly beneath fields that appear completely empty, Yaodong hides an entire village carved deep into the earth, where the rooftops also serve as farmland. To create this underground world, some families once relied on as many as 3 generations working by hand for 3 to 5 years and removing thousands of loads of soil. Through that effort, sunken courtyards and living rooms gradually took shape within thick layers of loess, allowing the structure to distribute ground vibrations more effectively. Instead of building upward with bricks and stone, residents carve corridors and rooms directly into the earthen walls, using the natural material already available. Beyond supporting the structure, the surrounding soil provides effective insulation, keeping the interior warm in winter and cool during summer. To see this hidden community, visitors must pass through an L-shaped tunnel nearly 100 feet long before descending beneath the farmland. Giving up roads and motor vehicles entirely, Ganvi in Benin spreads across the water like a city that has learned to survive without dry land. Few people know that this floating settlement was created as a refuge for communities escaping slave raids during the transatlantic slave trade. Today, nearly every journey, from children going to school to residents travelling to market, depends on narrow dugout canoes moving between the stilt houses. Fish farms made from reeds and branches divide the shallow lake into separate pens, turning the surrounding water into a major source of food and income. Over time, salt in the brackish water weakens the wooden stilts, forcing residents to repair and replace the supports beneath their homes every 15 to 20 years. The greatest paradox is that although water surrounds them in every direction, clean drinking water remains scarce and must be purchased and carried home in containers. Drifting across the lake like a village with a life of its own, Chong Nis must keep moving in order to survive. For many families without secure documents or land ownership, this unstable settlement is the only home they have left. Every dry season, thousands of patched houses are towed more than 3 miles into the lake to avoid becoming trapped in the mud. This movement is possible because homes, schools, and shops float on empty drums, bamboo rafts, or old boat hulls instead of solid foundations. Life becomes even harsher as the water level changes from about 3 feet to nearly 30 feet, leaving the entire village exposed to waves and violent storms. The deepest paradox is that although residents live on a vast freshwater lake, they must still buy every container of clean water brought in from the shore. Dunluce Castle, Ireland. When night falls over this place, its roofless walls make it feel like a shelter slowly drained of life by the sea through every crack in the stone. It was built on a volcanic basalt outcrop around 1500. Then warrior families turned it into a power base beside the ocean. In the early 17th century, a town once grew around the castle with very modern planning, but it was erased during the conflict of 1641. The rock beneath it was formed from cooled lava about 50 to 60 million years ago, yet it is still being worn down by winds over 62 miles per hour, sea salt and moisture. The most chilling event says a storm once dragged the kitchen into the sea with many servants, leaving only one kitchen boy alive. Once you cross the narrow bridge and see broken steps stopping before empty air, you understand why this place feels like a dangerous house waiting for its next piece to fall into the sea. Guaita Tower San Marino. Hidden inside Italy, this 1,000-year-old stone mass clings to the edge of a vertical cliff like a lonely house hanging in the sky. At about 2,464 feet high, the scariest part is not the number, but the cliff that drops almost straight down below the walls. Whenever the weather shifts, fog rises and swallows the valley, making the fortress seem cut away from the ground and floating on a sea of clouds. First built in the 11th century, the structure is locked directly into the natural rock core instead of using a normal foundation, helping it survive for nearly 1,000 years. Because of its isolated position on the highest point, this place has endured countless storms and direct lightning strikes. From the arrow slits at the top, the view opens for dozens of miles in every direction, turning this small structure into a lonely lookout between sky, rock, and clouds. Perched above a steep abyss, this Royal Observation Deck in Switzerland looks like an ornate ribbon stretched across the sky to hide the harshness of nature. From 4,337 feet, the view feels almost divine, revealing a valley trapped between two turquoise lakes and a vast wall of eternal ice. To support the giant steel platform reaching into open space, engineers had to drive long iron piles deep into the limestone core to resist the pull of gravity. The descending funicular creates a frightening sensation as its 64% slope makes passengers feel as if they are plunging toward the bottom of the cliff in a vehicle without brakes. Beside the edge, a red-roofed restaurant shaped like a castle uses its luxurious appearance to calm the instinctive fear of visitors. When sounds from the funnel-shaped valley echo upward, the human illusion of control quickly disappears before the endless scale of nature. Rising precariously on slender wooden stilts 20 to 30 feet high, Kampong Fluk appears suspended between dry land and the returning flood. This extreme height is essential for survival because seasonal water eventually swallows the dirt roads and rises beneath the wooden floors. As the village transforms, small boats replace every street, carrying children to school, adults to market, and fishermen toward the open water. Beneath and beside the houses, boats, fishing nets and fish cages fill the narrow spaces, reflecting a community where most families depend heavily on the lake for food and income. Long-tail boats then move through the flooded village and surrounding forest, using exposed propeller shafts to cross shallow water and tangled vegetation. Kampong Fluk survives not by defeating the flood, but by rebuilding every journey, job, and daily routine around the endless rise and fall of the water. Clinging proudly to the steep mountainside, Masule appears like an architectural challenge thrown directly at the law of gravity. Every house is covered in bright yellow clay, making the village easier to see through thick fog and helping residents follow the paths along the dangerous slope. The terrain is too steep and narrow for motor vehicles, leaving human feet and pack animals as the main ways to transport people and supplies. Because there is almost no level ground, the houses are stacked tightly together, turning the roof of one family's home into the street and gathering space for the people living above. From its lowest foundations to its highest buildings, the village climbs about 328 feet, resembling a tall tower pressed sideways against the mountain. Even the cemeteries follow this difficult landscape, occupying the limited ground within and around a community that has lived vertically for centuries. Perched about 3,281 feet above sea level, Palangan rises like a stone fortress defying gravity, with houses built from tightly stacked rocks and almost no mortar. With almost no level ground available, the buildings climb the slope in layers, turning each lower roof into a pathway and living space for the family above. The steep, narrow terrain makes motor vehicles nearly useless, forcing residents and pack animals to carry supplies along stone steps and tight passages. A deep, V-shaped gorge cuts through the settlement, where a rushing river divides the village into two halves, connected by narrow bridges. Sharing the same cold grey colour as the mountainside, the houses blend into the rock so completely that Palangan almost disappears from a distance. Yet on rooftops with few protective barriers, one missed step can turn a familiar pathway into a dangerous fall down the steep slope. Perched on a volcanic slope at 5,577 feet, Butu quickly leaves newcomers out of breath as they face climbs that seem to never end. The land is so steep that most farming machines cannot operate, forcing residents to carry vegetables and heavy sacks by hand along narrow paths. Life becomes even harder at night because despite its tropical location, temperatures here can sometimes fall to around 46 degrees Fahrenheit. On this same mountainside, with almost no flat ground, thousands of homes rise in steep layers, forming what looks like a concrete waterfall flowing into the valley. Within this precarious maze, brightly painted walls stand out against the green fields and the grey mountain cliffs behind them. Now, this unusual landscape helped transform Butu from an almost unknown village into a global attraction after drone footage revealed its remarkable layered structure from above. Among ice-covered peaks, Ushguli raises dozens of stone towers like a medieval fortress trapped at an altitude of 7,218 feet. To withstand the winter cold, its houses were built with heavy stone, thick walls and small windows designed to preserve heat. Many buildings have 2 floors, with livestock once kept below so their body heat could warm the family living space above. Rising beyond the rooftops are multi-storey defensive towers that once protected residents during conflicts and sudden attacks. In summer, the grey stone walls and dark roofs stand sharply against green meadows, making the entire settlement resemble a preserved ancient fortress. But in winter, snow covers the roofs, courtyards and roads, turning these buildings into protective shells that help residents survive months of isolation. Exposed at an altitude of 16,732 feet, La Rinconada appears like a kingdom of metal built for gold, where every breath becomes hard work. After darkness falls, weak mining lights and the sound of drills echoing from inside the mountain turn the frozen settlement into an industrial nightmare. Although tens of thousands of people live here, the town still lacks reliable running water, sewage systems, and basic garbage collection. Under the Caserio system, miners work unpaid for weeks in exchange for one day when they may carry out as much ore as they can manage. Across the barren mountainside, rusty metal shacks stand among black mud, trash, sewage and chemicals used to separate gold. Women are often kept outside the mines, forcing many to search through discarded rocks in the freezing cold, hoping to find tiny pieces of gold. Standing alone against the sky at an altitude of 4,790 feet, this ruin once served as a harsh military observation post with almost no comfort. In 1703, a powerful earthquake struck the mountains, collapsing the watchtowers and permanently turning the fortress into ruins. The environment is so severe that almost no large trees or underground water sources exist, forcing the guards to survive on rainwater collected in stone reservoirs. The entire fortress grips a jagged limestone ridge, creating the frightening feeling of standing on the spine of a fossilized dragon. Covering 12,917 square feet, the compound contained no luxurious rooms and was simply a cold stone cage for soldiers and weapons. Remarkably, the technique of stacking stones with very little binding material is believed to have helped the walls absorb some of the ground's violent movement. Carved deep into the barren cliffside, Cennini's cave system was once a survival solution that helped ancient residents endure desert temperatures reaching 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Deep inside the dark rock chambers, blindfolded camels once walked continuously in circles day and night to power massive manual olive oil presses. Under the blazing sun, countless doorless cave entrances appear completely black, making the entire hill resemble a giant human skull staring down below. This mountain fortress has almost no modern sanitation facilities, making waste disposal a difficult and unpleasant challenge that depends heavily on natural decomposition under the desert sun. For hundreds of years, violent sandstorms have repeatedly struck the cliffside like sanding blades, gradually wearing away the already fragile caves. This desolate, strange and harsh appearance attracted Hollywood filmmakers, transforming Chenini into an iconic image of distant desert planets. Hidden between the clouds and deep abysses of the Andes, Iruya is a precarious settlement almost forgotten by the modern world. This place once served as a desperate fortress for indigenous people, built with sweat and blood without the help of heavy machinery though. Located more than 9,100 feet above sea level, the thin air can quickly punish the human body with severe altitude sickness. Even more frightening, brick walls cling to the edge of the slope, creating the feeling that they could plunge into the canyon if the loose ground gives way. Isolation reaches its peak during the rainy season when violent floods tear apart the only access road and completely trap the town. To reach this stone island, travellers must trust their lives to swaying buses crawling along narrow cliffs with no safety barriers. Perched on a rocky plateau 12,500 feet high, Fort C looks like the bare bore of a ship reaching out above the deep abysses of the Himalayas. The village has also witnessed the pain of many widowed families, as generations of men have been lost forever beneath the snow while attempting to conquer the surrounding peaks. After thousands of years of adaptation, local people develop biological traits that help their bodies use oxygen more efficiently in the thin air at high altitude. In a land with almost no firewood, residents dry yak dung and use this black gold for cooking and heating through bone-chilling nights. The village's silence is often shattered by the terrifying roar of massive blocks of ice collapsing from the surrounding mountain slopes. No road allows wheeled vehicles to enter, forcing residents to carry their entire world of supplies on their backs along steep mountain trails.